Good morning, everyone. Thank you for showing up in the morning of the day after the celebration party. My name is Tariq Daoud. I'm a program manager with Identity Division, and with me here.
I'm Sean Ivey, also a program manager in the Identity Division. Again, thanks for showing up. I wasn't sure if I was going to be here.
He was packing. We are both members of the customer success team, for those of you who do not know. If you are a major enterprise customer or above a certain number of seats, ask in your local region, then we are a service available to you for free from Microsoft, a direct link to the product group. We work closely with you. We help you deploy. And if you come across issues or gaps in the product, we take that feedback back to the product group, and we try to improve the product. So with that said, we see a lot of deployments. We see a lot of deployment issues and a lot of deployment good practices. So this session is about some of the learnings we've had. Every year we've had this now 2 years. We try to bring you the best of what we've learned and help you avoid also things that can slow you down. So the topics for today, we're going to talk about 3 topics in a bit more detail. We wanted to give you 3 things you can go do next week. And so all 3 of them you can go do next week. Some will take a little bit more work than others, but all 3 of them are very important and fairly recent in terms of people starting to adopt them, learn from them, find issues, and improve the process. So we're bringing you the learnings. The 3 topics today are blocking legacy authentication to our service, deploying a hybrid Azure AD join, and using it as part of your security posture and using it as part of your conditional access strategy, and then turning on password hashing. How many of you have been asked to turn on password hashing this week?
Everyone.
You have not heard it enough. OK, so Mark, you failed. Just kidding. OK. Real quick, first topic, block legacy auth. How many of you here are, in addition to dealing with Azure Active Directory, collaboration guys? You do messaging, Exchange, SharePoint configuration. How many of you are just identity guys? You do IAM. What are the rest of you? OK, so this is the topic in which both of you are going to embrace each other. So those of you who do collab and those of you who do identity, this is a topic that matters to both of you. What is block legacy auth? So this is how email used to work. On the left, you got our favorite user, Daniel. He's using an old mail client called POP. Those of you who are not aware, mail protocols were developed about 30 years ago in the 80s, early 80s. And when servers talked to each other, they talked over SMTP, port 25 famously. And when they improved the security of the protocol, they used TLS first, and then they talk SMTP. However, when a client is talking to a server, so always distinguish an email between 2 emails forwarding emails to each other. Here's an email from my side to your side, versus a client is trying to download and read his email. Initially, there was a protocol called POP, Post Office Protocol. And that one is the one Daniel is using. And POP, infamously, is a horrible protocol. Do not recommend it. If ever you're sending a mail client and it says POP, don't use it. But because it assumes one mail client in the world. So if you move to another machine, try to install POP, you'll find nothing in your inbox because the first client deleted all the messages. So just a side note. The other side of the screen, you've got our good friend Mark here, and he's using his favorite mail client, Pine. Anybody here from the University of Washington? Shout out to UW Huskies. They invented this Pine client. So Pine is an example of an IMAP client, another legacy protocol, email protocol for the clients again. Both of them have the same problem, which is they pop up these boxes, those 2 boxes on the sides. Boxes that basically ask you for username and password. Whenever you see a client, any protocol, any software you're running that renders the UI within native OS graphics, you have a problem. Because after it's done, and it's sent, that means you can take the credentials from you and send them over the wire to something, right? And once it's done, if that something says, hey, I need MFA, hey, I need device check, how is it going to do that? It's done. It's collected the credentials. As far as it's concerned, as far as the code path for the developer wrote, it says, okay, get credentials, send over wire, expect result. There is no such thing as expect result. Oh, go back to the user and ask for more stuff. So That's kind of the older protocols that do not support what we call modern authentication. A modern authentication, the client will surface a web browser, a browser of some sort, embedded in the UI or pop up the actual OS browser. So whenever you see native login boxes, you know you're in trouble. And finally, is this a Microsoft-specific problem? Did we cause this? No, we did not cause this. So the screenshot up top shows you how to connect to Gmail over Telnet. Basically, with IMAP, you can connect to Gmail right now to your inbox. And as you can see, the login command up there, you can put in your username and password in clear text. This poses a problem to the mail service, right? So imagine your Exchange Online down there, and you now just received the username and password. What do? You turn around and you go to Azure and you say, hey, I have a, you go through a trusted channel, and you say, hey, I have a username and a password, can you please validate them for me? Azure AD says, sure, it's valid or invalid, but the admin set a policy of MFA. The admin set a policy of block when outside corp, inside corp. How does Exchange has nothing to go back and tell the client other than yes or no. That's it. So all Exchange can do is say yes or no to the mail. It can only say, 401 or here's your mail. That's it. Those are two options that the protocol allows it to say back to the client. So that is the general problem of legacy auth. You have it if you're on Office 365. You have it if you're on a mail system on premises. You have it everywhere. The reason you have it is because most of the mail clients in the universe right now are still supporting POP and IMAP and MAPI and all kinds of other stuff. OK, that's the problem. These are some of our examples that use legacy auth if you did not know. If you're on, how many of you are on Office 2010 for your clients? Okay. Ooh. Shame. Sorry. Shame. Nobody's going to raise their hands. So for the couple of you who raised your hands, please try to move to 2013 or 2016. It is a backdoor. 2010 cannot do any modern authentication. You cannot control it from, you cannot tell the client to do anything better. All you can do is just block it from the outside through some means. We'll talk about some of the existing means and some of the new means. The other guilty party, for example, from us from the Azure AD side is, for example, the PowerShell module, which used to authenticate with this beautiful pop-up. And once you do that again, you can't do MFA. So if you, for example, follow our best practices, we've been hammering all week long about challenging your, at least your privileged accounts with MFA. You couldn't do that with the old PowerShell module because it got the credentials and moved on. Today, if you download the newer modules and we'll have links for them, then you can at least do MFA. This link in the client behaviors is very useful. It actually shows you the default behavior of each client and based on also the service settings. And we'll talk about the service settings in a bit. So why block it? So as we said, and as you saw in the picture, most of you can deduce the problem. The problem is that legacy auth forces the hand of the IDP to do username and password auth only, right? It forces your hand. You can't do MFA, you can't do device check, you can't do cert auth, you can't do anything creative. All you can do is username and password, yes or no. So for example, we've seen patterns of attack in our service where a bad guy will phish one of your users. Your user will surrender their credentials willingly to some pop-up or some fake login page. And then they'll try to come in and attack the user through Azure AD, and we block them because you did the right thing. You require MFA on the user. OK? So now the user is safe. Not so. They will try and come back through POP and IMAP and try the same credentials until they see if they're going to actually get something or not. So that's exactly how they use it. They try to use it to validate. They also try to use it to actually password spray your entire directory, because these protocols also are very dumb. They're not like, we have what we call, on the web logins, we have something called smart lockout, right? Where we push back on failed attempts, and we push back more intelligently against the same password over and over versus different passwords where we push back harder and so on. None of that matters to a legacy client. Doesn't understand it. So it's it's the biggest compromise, as you can see, the biggest vector for attack on our services for Office 365 customers has been legacy auth. They're not trying web login. They're actually trying to hammer away at an endpoint. Plus, it's very quick to try these things. You don't have to spin up a web page and a browser to get the response back or do an HTTP call. It's much faster to simply be on a telnet and simply try connect with one person after another. So this is some of our best practices. We'll have a link to that as well at the end of the deck around protecting yourself from password spray. So this is a more comprehensive guide looking at block legacy auth plus the session before our session on smart lockout and ADFS. And so it's a combination of best practices, how to protect yourself from this. This is a very widespread attack vector across the world, across different customers, and they don't care if you're on Office 365, if you're on Google, G Suite, they're just trying to harvest credentials. Okay, so what is your plan to defeat legacy auth? So here are some suggestions and some steps. We're going to walk through one at a time, and hopefully it makes sense. The first thing you need is to, I need his face.
I'm here for a reason.
Ta-da, there we go, that's it.
I can go back to where I was.
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to show you, we're going to quickly switch over to an actual live tenant to show you how to search for legacy auth. So the tactic is basically, how many of you know you're using legacy auth right now? For a fact. How many of you know you're not using legacy auth for a fact? See, the most of you are uncertain. There you go. So this is for you. So the best thing to do is, now the biggest achievement we've done over the last 6 months is we've now given you in the sign-in logs the traces you need to go debug this, to find out. It used to be only on the Exchange side. We would have no trace of it on our side because it's in a back channel between us and Exchange. So Exchange was required to show it to you in the audit logs, in the IMAP logs, CAS log, whatever, right? It was not our problem. Now we've fixed that. So now all the sign-ins come through us. You can look at them, examine them, filter by protocol. So this allows you to kind of build a picture in your mind of who's using it and how often. So let's take a look at an example. Ta-da. So this is your typical Azure AD page. All of you know how to get here? Anybody doesn't? Let's talk afterwards. Sign-in logs. These are the new sign-in logs. As you can see, we have all kinds of logs in this tenant. So I am going to maybe go for the last month. The filter we're talking about is this filter right here. It's a very important filter. So here you can break it down by POP, IMAP, or MAPI, SMTP, and see who's using each of these, right? So if we go to IMAP, for example, and apply, we see that Caleb Baker, the PM of conditional access himself, is a frequent user of IMAP. If we try and go to other clients, what is other clients? It's anything else that is not these standard protocols. What would something like that be? Oh, look, SharePoint Online has some legacy auth. It's not just Exchange, even though we talked a lot about mail protocols, right? There are some also pre-modern auth bolt-ons to SharePoint Online that call into SharePoint Online to authenticate using basic auth.
And also, I was going to say also like the Word and Excel from like 2010, you're using the MS Sign-In Assistant to do the authentication there, which is also legacy authentication.
So these are just examples of how you can query your own sign-in log to kind of see by protocol who's using what. And then after you, so let's go back to the IMAP, for example. And after you've done that, what you could do is export it or download it through CSV, up here, the download button, and look at the CSV and sort by protocol, sort by user and protocol, do your Excel wizardry, and find all the offending people. So then comes the hard part, which is, okay, what do I do about these people? So what are you going to uncover? You're going to uncover horrible things. You're going to uncover 3 types of use cases, right? One is they're just using a mail client, and they have no necessarily strong preference to anything, right? So your approach there is going to be what? Upgrade. IT campaign, gradually target them by region, by department, by zone, by who they report to, whatever, right? Please start with your own IT department, right? And then just, hey guys, we're moving to this new client. I notice all of you are using IMAP. You can chat with them and find what the client is. It could be 9. It could be the native iOS app from iPhone 6, and so on. So just figure out what they're using and instruct them on, hey, we're moving to this newer client. We're going to have some very good suggestions for you in a couple of slides. The other possibility you're going to find is a middle tier or backend application that's authenticating to the service directly. We mentioned one example, SharePoint. We mentioned the other example we can think of is, for example, you'll find some, on your ERP side, you'll find some billing service that sends invoices to your resellers, for example, and that thing needs to call in with SMTP and authenticate with and a service account, username and password in the clear. To rewrite that one is going to take a while. So, or to have them buy and order a new app is going to take some effort. So that one will basically going to have to exclude for a while. Okay? And then the third one is going to be, that passionate and highly ranked enough person who refuses to upgrade their mail client because it's the best thing since cream cheese, and it has this functionality of sorting the contacts that all these other mail clients don't have. And therefore, you're just going to have to exclude them for a while until you show them this deck and convince them that it's not safe for your org, it's a risk, and then hopefully upgrade them at some point. Okay, so how to block? So how many of you are familiar with the conditional access UI? Good, 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 but not enough. So we'll switch over real quick.
Starting to think a lot of you are just tired.
Or haven't woken up yet. So in case you have not seen the conditional access UI real quick, you come here. You will create a new policy. I will repeat the instructions in the slide. First and foremost, you apply on the user side. You will use both include and exclude. You will include everybody. Right, so we'll call this one here sample block legacy auth. I am not going to turn it on because this is a demo tenant where others right now might be demoing. So I'm going to say all users, but then I'm going to exclude a specific set of group of users. Right? And then I can just pick any group. AD premium users in Europe. Big fans of Pine, so I will select them, for example. So that then I now chose who's in scope, who's going to be blocked, and who's going to be allowed to continue to use legacy auth. Okay? On the next box, you can choose all apps if you want to be safe, but definitely choose at least Exchange Online and SharePoint Online. So I'm sorry. Cool. Now, the key point to this whole policy is in this under conditions here, try not to select anything else. Just go to the client apps and choose, yes, I'm going to apply client apps. I'm going to uncheck everything except other clients. Right? If you combine other things that we can't check for, we may either skip the policy or misapply the policy, right? So, like for example, if you could, consider OS, and the OS is not coming in the user agent strings through Exchange to us, and we don't know what the OS is, we will not apply the policy. Because you said only apply the policy to Win 10, for example, or iOS. We can't see the string of the OS. What we're going to do, we're going to skip the policy, right? So be careful here and just make sure that you keep the clients one simple, the client app condition simple. And then under the access controls one, you will choose block. Okay, pretty straightforward. So back to the slides. So I've got this listed out in order. I'm not going to discuss ADFS. How many of you are familiar with ADFS block legacy auth? Okay, so about half the room. That makes sense. So the link is there for those of you who have ADFS, do not have Azure AD Premium, do not want to buy Azure AD Premium, and you just want to keep protecting yourself the old school way. The link is there. The key point I want to message with the link here is that be mindful of the fact that ADFS will examine headers and user agent strings to kind of determine some of the stuff, whereas with Azure AD, it's actually Exchange calling us with this stuff. So it's not like somebody tricked Exchange. No, it's actually somebody came through IMAP to Exchange, and Exchange called us to authenticate. So we know for a fact it's IMAP. We're not guessing. Okay, so this is a cool intermediate step. Side note for those of you who have, how many of you have E5 or Azure AD Premium P2? Nice, good. So for those of you actually have a cool feature, which is you can mix access reviews with conditional access. You can basically have that group that I picked, you can run regular access reviews for its members maybe once a quarter, once a month to say, hey, are you still using a legacy mail client and do you still need to? Yes or no? So you kind of build that plausible deniability. It's not my fault, it's them. But also this is a blog on how to do it basically and run regular access reviews for it. Kind of also a reminder for you to kind of nudge them along if they're still saying it so 6 months later. Step 3, upgrade everybody to modern auth as much as you can. So as we saw, some of you have 2010. Please move to 2013 or 2016 Office client. If you have Macs, move to 2016. If you have mobile, use modern auth clients, which is a minority of mail apps on mobile right now, unfortunately. Shameless plug for our product here. Outlook has been doing it for almost 2 years now. Great product. Use it. If you have issues with the feature set, feel free to give Microsoft very harsh feedback, but do not compromise on security. Native iOS, native client, 11 plus, anything higher than 11 does modern auth. The leg up that Outlook has over the native iOS client is that it does full proper conditional access. So to explain that, the native mobile clients will pop up a browser and say do modern auth, do auth. So you will do username and password. If you're required to do MFA, you'll do MFA and come back. But if there are other conditions involved, it may not be able to do them. Whereas with Outlook, it's able to do device check as well as able to do any other criteria you're asking it to do. So just a side FYI. And don't forget our offensive PowerShell module. Here are the 2 links to the 2 other modules. The MS Online commandlets are the first link, and the second link is the Azure AD commandlets, the newer ones. And all our investments are in the newer ones, in case you're wondering. It's just that the older ones still do some domain functionality that the new one does not. And hopefully we'll be done with that soon. And step 4, block legacy auth for all your users, meaning get those last laggards off of the legacy clients and block it. Is that it? So are you done now? Success. Well, before you declare victory, be mindful of something. Conditional access deny or block is an access deny. What does that mean? It means you successfully authenticate first, and then we tell you you can't get there from here, right? So how many of you have seen you can't get there from here? So that's the typical conditional access error message, right? So what does that imply? That implies that if somebody's trying to check credentials against us, they will fail, right? We'll give them a 401. They will not know why exactly, because we'll return failure to Exchange. Exchange will return ambiguous failure to the client. You're good. You're protected from the guy who was trying to check the credentials. It doesn't protect you from the guy who's hammering away at you to lock out your accounts, or just password spraying, and somehow, let's say we're not detecting that there's a password spray going on, and so they're doing, somehow they cause sporadic lockouts in your tenant. Okay? So what to do about those guys? So that's where the last slide comes in. You block the legacy auth at the service level. You go to the Exchange side, and you start saying, I don't need this protocol. Shut it out. When you block things, there are 2 ways. Right now, there's a way to disable the protocol on the cast level, per user, or just across the whole tenant. You can do that. And then you can also do it, there's a private preview feature that is rolling out worldwide, so it's going to light up in your tenant at some point, according to gradual Exchange deployment. It's going to light up for you at some point, which actually allows you to kind of build a policy that says everybody in this department block POP for them, everybody in that region allow IMAP for them, and so on. So you can actually create a tenant-wide policy and then a per user group policy in exchange for that. It's a really cool feature, but it's still in development. But either old school or new school, you have to at some point get back to shutting down on the protocol level. Otherwise, you're going to be suspect to what? Lockouts. Make sense? Okay, and with that, I hand it over to my esteemed partner to talk about hybrid join.
Thank you. All right, so now we have legacy auth blocked. You're all finished, right? So we can jump into using hybrid Azure AD join with conditional access. So I want to talk about a couple of different things first and foremost. Deploying hybrid Azure AD join, I think, is a really good intermediate step to getting to Azure AD joined. All right, it's not a replacement for Azure AD joining Windows 10 machines, but there's a lot of things that you can do with hybrid Azure AD join that you might not be ready to do with Azure AD join in Windows 10. So a couple of things that I want to point out that are benefits. First and foremost, a better user experience. So most of the time when I see people implement this, they're using it with conditional access to supplement MFA or to replace MFA, really. Right? So you set up a conditional access policy like you see here on your right-hand side where you are requiring either MFA or a hybrid Azure AD join device. And if you come in from a hybrid Azure AD join device, now you've reduced the amount of MFA prompts that the user ends up seeing because they've got a known device that you're allowing them to access whatever resource it is that you're trying to protect. So from that perspective, you end up with a better end user experience. And I think you've probably heard this a couple of times at other presentations as well. The less you condition the user to accept the MFA prompt, whether it's a push notification or whatever, the better off you're going to be, right? It's an exception that they see this MFA now, and so they pay a little more attention to it. They just don't hit accept right away and move on. So that's one thing. Another thing is, especially within Windows 10, there's no home realm discovery that happens when you go to access your resources. Because as a part of the hybrid Azure AD join process, we get what's called a PRT, a primary refresh token, that we can now use to authenticate to Azure Active Directory. So, and the information in there tells me that this, the client that I'm accessing this from is from a particular organization, and now I don't have to worry about actually typing in my username to get redirected to my federation service, or have to type in my password or anything like that.
So how many of you have Windows 10 right now? Wow.
Yay.
Very good.
1607 or newer? Okay. That's almost as many hands.
All right.
Good. All right, so obviously a big part of this is the security implications. And it's secure despite of your network location, right? I mean, so many of us nowadays are working outside of our corporate network, but we want to make sure that when we're accessing these resources, we're still doing so from a secured managed device. This helps you achieve that. And an important part of this, too, is the fact that it's not just Windows 10. How many of you still have Windows 7? Yeah, OK, thought so. Although not as many hands as I thought. OK, anyway. So with Windows 7 and 8.1, you can actually use this as well. So it's not just a Windows 10 feature like Azure AD Join is. With hybrid Azure AD Join, I can actually enroll my Windows 7 and 8.1 clients. Now, on the bottom here, I just want to show you, you can see that I've got an Azure PRT. This is running the command on the machine dsreg-cmd/status to get the information about the Windows 10 device. So you can see that I've got a PRT here to access my resources in Azure Active Directory.
What's a PRT?
A primary refresh token, which was mentioned before, but he dozed.
I did not pay attention.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about how this works. And some of the things that you'll look for and notice as you go to deploy this. So associating devices with computers with devices. I'll explain that in a second. So this is actually a screenshot from my Azure Active, or my users and computers on premises of the machine that I'm going to hybrid Azure AD join. Now I'm specifically calling out here the object GUID. So everyone see that I've got an object GUID on this this computer account in Active Directory on-prem. What is this, 2947? So when I actually look at the ADFS rules, now you don't have to use ADFS to make this work. You can actually use PTA or password hash sync with a seamless single sign-on. But if you do use ADFS, there's some additional things you have to do. You have to add some claim rules to make sure that you're sending the necessary information. One of the claim rules that you end up adding is querying the computer object that's part of the authentication process here for the object GUID. So now I'm getting the object GUID from the on-premises computer object in Active Directory, and that's being sent as a claim to Azure Active Directory. Now, additionally, when you look on the sync server, you'll actually see there's a rule here that joins these two together. So I've got my on-premises computer account that I want to associate with the device that gets registered in Azure Active Directory. How do I do that? With the object GUID. So I'm showing the actual join rule here, but you'll also see in other parts of it we're using the object SID to provision this in the device in Azure Active Directory in the first place. So all of this is tied together so that we know the computer object that's joined to Active Directory on-prem is associated with the device object in Azure AD. And this is what we end up with. So when we finally have this device object joined, when you actually run the PowerShell command there that you can kind of see at the top, get-Azure AD device, I'm specifying the object ID so that I can get back the specific device. But here you can see this is the device ID that gets registered in Azure Active Directory. This device ID matches the object GUID of the computer account on-prem. So how do we prove that when we go to authenticate to Azure AD? How do we say, hey, look, this is the device that I am? with the cert that's now on the device. So if you look, now this is actually from a Windows 10 machine. So on Windows 10, I'm looking at the local computer's certificate store. And in there, you can see that I have a certificate with the subject name of the object GUID of the computer account on-prem. Right? So I'm taking this, and as I go to authenticate in Azure Active Directory, I do device authentication. I submit the certificate that's associated with this. And now Azure AD can associate that authentication with the registered device in Azure Active Directory. So hopefully this helps you see how all of this is tied together. It's a little bit different in Windows 7. So in Windows 7, it's not actually in the computer's local certificate store. It's in the user's local certificate store. But for all intents and purposes, everything else that I'm showing here is essentially the same. We're still using the object GUID of the domain joined computer account to seed the device ID within Azure Active Directory. All right, so a couple of do's and don'ts associated with this. The most, this is me speculating, but I can only imagine the most altered, changed, edited, updated article on all of docs.microsoft.com is the article that tells you how to do hybrid Azure AD join. This thing has been updated 1,000,000 times since its inception, but it's in a good state now, I promise.
Read it, read it. It changes every month.
So start there. Start with the article. Make sure you follow the steps. It's even broken down into whether or not you have a federated environment or you're doing managed authentication and the differences that you want to do between each of them. So definitely start here. Update Azure AD Connect. In my opinion, the easiest way to get this deployed now is to use the wizard in Azure AD Connect. You can do all of the steps manually, right? Registering the SCP. I'm not going to go through all of them. There's quite a few. But for example, registering the SCP, you can run a PowerShell command if you want. However, the wizard in Azure AD Connect will do that for you today. Same thing with the ADFS claim rules. You can do that manually. There's a lot of different things. ADFShelp.microsoft.com, for example, can give you the relying party trust rules if you need those. But again, Azure AD Connect can do all of that in the wizard. Makes it nice and easy to do. Now, a couple of things that I want to point out in addition to those. Do not expect this to work in an environment. Now, this is kind of odd, right? A lot of people don't have this set up. So let me make sure that I explain this correctly. If you have a single forest on premises, but you're syncing different OUs to different tenants in the cloud. So multiple cloud tenants, one single forest.
Anybody do that?
Anyone yet? Does anyone do that today?
Uh-huh.
So 2 or 3 hands, not a ton, but yeah. So keep in mind, this will only work for one of those forests. One of those tenants. You've got a single forest on-prem. The problem is you can only have one of the service connection points, SCPs, in Active Directory. It's in the config partition, and only one of them can point to one of the Azure Active Directory tenants. So today, it'll only work in one of those tenants. When registering down-level clients, all right, so clients older than Windows 10, 1607, this works differently. Like I said, in Windows 7 and 8, the certificate that we get to do the device authentication is actually in the user's certificate store, not the computer cert store. This is important for a couple of different reasons. Think about how this would work if you were using roaming profiles. Anyone still use roaming profiles? Wow, really?
Yes.
All right, I guess I'll mention it real quick for the recording then. Don't use it if you're using roaming profiles. There we go. How about credential roaming? Does anyone know what credential roaming is? Okay. Someone? Okay. All right. Well, in both of these scenarios, the reason stuff doesn't work quite as you had planned is because you're now putting the certificate and the registry information on a network server somewhere, and then when you go to log into another computer, you're pulling it back down. So in the case of a roaming profile, when you do that, it looks like the machine's already registered. So the machine doesn't try to re-register. Now, actually, in some cases, this will end up working. You go to access a resource that's protected that says only allow hybrid Azure AD join devices, and it'll submit that certificate and it'll work. But it doesn't look like it's coming from the machine that was originally registered. It's really hard to track and maintain because the user will end up registering on the very first device they logged into and then not a single other one. Same thing with credential roaming, except in that case, you're only copying the certificate up with private key. But the problem is now the machine doesn't have the registry key that says it's already been registered. So it tries to register again, and you end up with another certificate. You log off, we copy that one off. You log into another machine, we try again, you got another cert, so on and so forth, and now you got a million certs in your user store, and you wonder why everything's broken. So in both of those cases, if you're using Windows 7, don't do this. It should work fine with Windows 10, though, because, again, the cert's not in the Windows, or not in the user store. Seamless SSO is also required for down-level clients. So if you're using pass-through authentication or password hash sync for authentication, seamless SSO is necessary in order for this to work. Otherwise, if you're using ADFS, it'll work regardless.
Let's do a quick poll. How many of you are federated versus cloud authenticating with password hash sync or PTA?
Federated?
Is that federated?
So.
And how many are cloud, the others, right? So how many of you are using seamless SSO, the ones who are not federated? How many of you? Not enough. All of you should go back and turn around. It's very trivial like this and allows customers with password hash sync and PTA to do Windows integrated auth with Azure AD and just get in right away, right? So same gives your end users a similar experience to the ADFS users when they just type in their username, hit next, and they get signed in right away on premises inside Corp. There's no excuse not to turn on. It's very, very light.
Yeah, very simple to set up, and like Tarek said, much, much better end user experience, because as long as you're on a machine that's domain joined, that has access to a domain controller, Windows integrated auth happens, they don't get prompted for a username and password. So definitely do that if you're not using it today. Another thing to note, do not sysprep an image that has already been joined. So make sure that you do your imaging and sysprep and then let the auto join happen after the fact. Don't actually sysprep an image that's already been joined. And plan for your shared environments. So this is similar to kind of what we were talking about with roaming profiles and credential roaming. If you have environments that aren't persistent, right? You're using a VDI environment, maybe it gets wiped after the user logs off or whatever. They log in again. Now you have a ton of registered devices that aren't even valid anymore. One of the things that customers that we've worked with have done in the past is they'll put in a log-off script to have the device unregister after the user's logged in and done the registration. So now you don't end up with a ton of devices inside of Azure Active Directory that are stale and no longer valid. Either that, or I've also had other customers that, for whatever reason, have had a specific IP address range that they could exclude from the policy in the first place, so they didn't bother doing the hybrid Azure AD join on them. And then finally, the whole point behind this is to be able to block access to or require MFA for the non-hybrid Azure AD join machines to protect your highly valuable assets in Azure Active Directory. So make sure you've got your conditional access policy set up to do so. All right, number 3. For the love of all your users, enable password hash sync.
Yes.
Now.
The moment of truth. How many of you have password hash sync enabled? Okay, Mark. So please keep your hands up. Mark is going to hand out some, hopefully before he runs out. We have some PIM licenses for you, those of you who have password hash sync enabled. These are trial licenses for a year, 5, maybe cover different sections. Sorry if we run out. And we also have stickers here for you guys as well.
Stickers as a consolation prize. Stickers that don't stick very well, but they're up here.
The SSPR ones are very good and they stick very well.
Oh, okay, all right.
The obscure lock one doesn't work. Don't use it. Go ahead.
All right, so a couple of things. Password hash does not equal the password. Hopefully we've drilled this in your heads enough now. You're not syncing the actual password. You're syncing a hash of the password. Actually, much more complicated than that. I mean, it's about as far as you can possibly get from the actual password for this. You don't have to change your authentication to make this work. This is showing up a lot smaller on the screen than I thought it would. But if you'll notice, this is just a quick screen capture of the wizard for Azure AD Connect. There's 2 different sections here. There's the change user sign-in, and then there's the actual customized synchronization options. You want to go, like if you're already federated and your intent isn't to move to password hash sync for authentication, fine. You don't have to do the change user sign-in. Instead, just go to the options over here, and as a part of that, you can enable password hash sync without actually using that as an authentication method. So even if you're federated, please, please, please turn this on. You get your leak credentials report as a part of Azure AD P1, so you don't need P2 to take advantage of this. You still get the leak credentials report as a part of P1. If everything goes down, this actually might end up saving your job. We've got a scenario where this has happened in the past. Everything on premises is essentially dead, but your users can still access Azure Active Directory because you have password hashes synced to the cloud that allow them to authenticate through us.
So how many of you were impacted by NotPetya attack from 2017? Any of you were? Or WannaCry? The SMB thing? So we know, yeah, not all of you are telling the truth, but we know of several enterprise customers who had it basically on-premises was shut down, domain controllers were shut down, ADFS was shut down. So this saves your collaboration suite to keep working in the cloud. Imagine having to bring that environment up without email or IM or anything, right?
Yeah, it gets pretty ugly. So having this turned on was a lifesaver for a lot of people who were affected by that. Also, keep in mind, this is enabled for 82% of Azure AD active tenants today. And of that, that represents about 57% of Azure Active Directory active users. So if you do not have this turned on, you are in the minority at this point. 650,000 compromised credentials detected in 2 years and over 50 million accounts scanned. So, I mean, this is not something that we're just, paying lip service to. This is real. This is actually protecting people.
If you do the math, that's more than 1%, right? More than 1%. That could possibly be your environment as well. And so you don't know. And if somebody in your security org thinks it's the risk of syncing the hashes of your password to the cloud somehow outweighs finding out if 1% of your credentials are already on the dark web, then show them that white paper at the bottom. This is a white paper, my team more specifically, that actually shows you how the hashes are secured and protected on our side. And it's actually more secure than they are on your side. Not bragging, just fact. You can look at it yourself. So the hashes are encrypted and stored in a separate store from the salts, which are also encrypted, and both of them are encrypted at rest anyways and in transit both. So if you have something better, let us know, but show that to your security team.
Yeah, the MD4 hashes in your Active Directory are not cutting it anymore.
So some resources, finally, some links from the stuff we mentioned. We also, for the recording and for others who will be watching this later, we have the next 2 slides are the sessions of Azure AD overall, the whole day, the whole week, I guess. And then please don't forget to evaluate this session. And we have about 3 minutes for your questions. If anybody has any questions, the mics are here, or I can repeat the question. Questions about any of the 3 topics? Or any topic, actually.
I see a lot of phones held up, but not hands.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for this great presentation. The question I have is regarding the organization that use smart card authentication, where all the users in the organization use smart card authentication, and also we have a tenant in the window Azure. How do we leverage this pass the hash while we're using smart card authentication?
It doesn't help you much. If you're only smart card only, like actually your users themselves don't know their passwords, then it doesn't obviously help you that much. In this case, that's not your attack vector. But smart cards do not, Azure AD right now does not authenticate to smart cards. You have to rely on ADFS to do the cert auth for you. But yeah, in this case, you are one of the few who are not terribly worried about that one. Yes.
One of the exceedingly few, yes. Not many people we work with are using smart cards on-prem. So, but yeah, in that situation, if you're all smart card, yeah, there's not a ton of benefit there.
Yes, sir. One last question.
So this isn't about security per se, but just my annual check-in of where things are at on the Azure AD side, or where the blockers are in terms of removing the need to keep an on-prem Exchange server. If you're doing password hash and all synchronization and everything else, and you don't care about maintaining an on-prem Exchange anymore.
Yeah. Great question if you just ask it to the Exchange guys. So you're asking the guys who believe. We agree. So the context of his question is if you get to a place where you've moved your email already to the cloud, everything is in the cloud, you've even switched your MX record to the cloud, but you're still managing identity on-prem because that's where your lifecycle, HR, everything comes from on-prem, then you are required by the Exchange team to maintain 2 hybrid servers on-prem, 2 CAS servers to manage recipients. You can't manage recipients in the cloud directly, or at least some parts of the recipient management. So they're working on it, if you're asking me, but you're asking the identity guy. I know they're working on it. I know they plan to announce something probably early next year, but again, it's the code from the identity guy. You can't hold them to. Thanks. Okay, thank you all very much. Oh, one question, sorry. Go ahead.
You enable password hashing. You're doing away with the ADFS?
If you enable password hashing, are you doing away with the ADFS? No, you are not. That's kind of the...
Yeah, you don't have to, right? So, I mean, it's up to you. Half of what I do nowadays is moving my customers from ADFS to managed auth, whether it's password hash sync or pass-through authentication, but it's by no means required. You can have them coexist so that your authentication happens with ADFS. You're just syncing the password hashes specifically for the security benefits.
And for the fallback benefits. So.
And for the fallback, the ability to revert.
But it doesn't interfere. It doesn't. If you saw that the screenshot he had, the yellow was basically, I'm just going to turn on PHS. The red was, I'm going to switch to PHS. So that's the difference between the 2 boxes.
Yeah, this screenshot up here.
Thank you all very much. And if you have any more questions, come on over.
Thank you.